My uncle invested in the Timnath area Harmony Club back in 2007 and was an early adopter. And I remember talking. Now, I was just graduating high school at the time, which was a super interesting move because they moved to a very nice, luxurious house at the Harmony Club. But it was outside of Fort Collins. It was way the heck out of there in the Sticks area. And we as a family kind of looked at him like, what are you doing? But the thing about my uncle is he has been and is extremely involved in community. He was the mayor of Timnath for the last 4 years. And other than that, was involved with the chamber, just very knowledgeable and informed about the community and city. And so he saw something that we definitely didn't see. Now, it took nearly nearly 20 years, but the Harmony Club absolutely has the most houses of 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million, 3 million plus in all of Northern Colorado for any development around. And we had a client that reached out and asked us like, hey, what are your thoughts about this club? And they kind of had a price point of $800,000. And I sent them a screenshot of a couple of lots that were listed for $600,000 and $800,000 respectively. But it just showed price tags with a bunch of other millions and $2 million around the area. And I said, you see those $590,000 and $800,000 sticker tags? That's just for the lot. And my guess is absolutely, had some good relationships, understanding of the builders, the master plan, all of that good stuff. But he also probably saw a little bit, at least, of the writing on the wall of Fort Collins's growth is so confounded to north, south, and even to the east with I-25. So places like Timnath and Severance and Windsor, Wellington, Johnstown, Berthoud, Loveland were all expected to experience dramatic growth with kind of the capping, so to speak, of Fort Collins. And that's just what happened. Now, that's all to be said, that's what really this conversation and weekly live is discussing. What's happening in Fort Collins, moving and shaking, information, city council recaps. What are their long range plans? Where are developers seeking to go? What are conversations happening that could help you make informed decisions that could help your personal development as far as where you want to go and or potentially even your pocketbook? Because, well, shoot, right now, Mulberry and I-25, that entire area is kind of slated to get renovated, annexed into Fort Collins, and beautified over the next 10 to 20 years, as is Midtown. And so if you're making an investment in, say, a place like Meadowlark, absolutely, you have to have a conversation with yourself of, okay, well, Beatty could close down. Maybe not. Only 40% of the kids in that neighborhood are going to Beatty. But you have King Supers being developed. You have College and Drake that are going to see a bank, a gas station, that Mazda renovated and sold from Spradley Bar to a developer or kept as and developed. And so you're going to see these areas and kind of the business improvement district of Midtown. And all of these conversations are happening. Whereas if you aren't in those conversations or at least knowledgeable of them, you might overlook Midtown as kind of this forgotten child, and South Fort Collins and even Old Town North and, of course, downtown Fort Collins are going to get all the investment dollars. But the reality is Midtown is actually a super attractive place with the McQuinney's taking over the Foothills Mall and their redevelopment plans of that area. I mean, so many cool different things. And then we obviously have the Max Transit line with a lot of dollars coming there from the state with their transit-oriented developments, kind of their overlays for development and where dollars could go and public transportation. So that's what we're coming to you with every Monday between 12 to 1 o'clock, roughly. They're roughly lasting about 45 minutes to an hour. This might be a little bit shorter because we don't have a guest on, but we've been bringing a guest on from the team to discuss each week. But we talked about what's happening what's going on, city council review, some developments under review, and we hold it live so that if you have any questions or comments or want to engage, this is a great opportunity to kind of get live feedback. Now, I don't say I know everything by any means about Fort Collins, but we are very much watching what's happening and involved with a day-to-day basis with the business community, city council. And so we're trying to convey that knowledge through means of YouTube. So appreciate you guys watching, and here we go. Let's go. So there was a study that suggests that Colorado is going to return to its pre-pandemic economic levels between 3.5% to 4% growth, which is actually kind of shocking. The Philadelphia Reserve put out this study, and it actually, one of the big pushing indicators for our economy is housing. And housing actually has been relatively stagnant, if not on a little bit of a downward trend on a state level. So that's great news, because I will say there's some concern, especially city government, lots of different, ARPA dollars, American Recovery Plan Act. There's a lot of different federal dollars that are going to start expiring sooner than later, that has been kind of buoying, so to speak, these governments, municipalities, businesses, and we need to start seeing these areas and businesses and governments standing on their own. And even there was a conversation with a buddy of mine who was talking about, like, PTER School District is a good example of that they had a lot of federal funds come in, and those are starting to expire and are also having a budgetary issue, which is where the steering committee, and we're going to actually talk about that here shortly, are coming into place. So Colorado returning to pre-pandemic economic levels is a great sign for the state in general. Now, here's an interesting conversation. Headline was, excuse me, I've been fighting a cough for about 10, 15 days, and it got kind of worse over the weekend. But after ending school closure process, PTER School District Board is discussing a $50 million school for the, let's see here. It is the PTER Community Academy. Now, I'm actually really excited about this. It's for grades 8 to 12. And this is kind of alternative paths for students who want to look at culinary arts, cosmetology, automotive technology, medical assistant, and cybersecurity. I will say, I'm a huge proponent of kind of alternative paths. I still think a high school diploma and a college degree, depending on the degree that it, and maybe even school that comes from, are still extremely valuable. The ability to critically think is extremely important. But there's also different paths that might not necessarily be for, a 4-year high school diploma and a 4-year degree definitely isn't for everybody. And blue collar jobs or, labor type jobs are in short supply and in high demand. So my neighbor went to school and got his kind of, he got his high school diploma, but then he went and became a journeyman plumber. And Fossil Ridge had these programs that he could actually go through high school and start getting some hours, experience, and internships. And now the dude owns his house, isn't living with mom and dad, doing extremely well and getting paid extremely well. He will absolutely be, working with his hands, heavy labor for, potentially his entire life, unless he decides to become a business owner with all the relationships that he built and skills and knowledge that he's acquired. But the dude is crushing it. And when you take into consideration the stipends and things that he's getting, I wouldn't bet that he's making less than $100,000 a year, and he's not even 22 years old yet. So not a college graduate and making 6 figures. So good on him. But apparently the school has some aging pieces to it. It's roof and it just needs a lot of overhaul, and they're already kind of busting at the seams, apparently, this kind of PTER Community Academy. And so they're talking about different alternatives and ideas, but it probably doesn't sound very good when not just 2-3 weeks ago they were talking about closing schools because of declining enrollment and budgetary factors. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we got to not close schools, but we actually got to build a new one. And so it doesn't sound great, but regardless, it sounds like they also have different assets they could leverage. There's a Fulana facility that used off of North Grant that used to be elementary school, and there's room for kids in that school. So, that is on the discussion board. And apparently it was a 6-hour conversation. Now, here were some interesting key takeaways, because there was a steering committee of 37 members that ultimately were discussing boundaries, school closures, consolidations that were retreated from a few weeks back. And then their studies came out. And some of the studies were that birth rates really aren't the issue necessarily for the PTER School District. What the issue is cost of living, housing is prohibitively restrictive for younger families to move here. And there is a discrepancy between incoming kindergartners and outgoing seniors. So for numbers' sake, we were looking at 2,601 high school seniors graduated last year versus only 1,929 kindergartners. Or I should say last fall, there was 2,601 high school seniors and only 1,929 kindergartners. And I think that's a good measure, but I do think that I think that, yes, there's not as many young families that are able to afford here and are moving to areas like Wellington, Timnath, Severance, Windsor. And I will say, when our kids were going and playing at the Windsor Wizards, Little Wizards soccer league, because my brother-in-law and sister live in Windsor, I mean, there was tons of kids, and they all lived in Windsor. We were one of the few. It was interesting because I was coaching, and some of the parents would ask, well, where are you from? And, I'm from Fort Collins. Right? You're from Fort Collins? You drove out here for practice? And I would have to tell them why. But everyone else was from Windsor going there. So younger families are finding their way to more affordable areas. But there are plenty of families with kids in late elementary or even early middle school that are making the move and transition to Fort Collins. And that's probably a relationship to their finances and ability. As we get older, we tend to make more money. So their ability to afford and their desire to be in a phenomenal school district like PTER School District. So I'd be curious to see how that number differentiates from kindergartners to, let's say, sixth graders versus seniors. And if that number increases to a number that is notable in the last 3 to 5 years versus just kindergartens. Because I do think that, yes, that makes complete sense that, cost of living, housing, young family, it does make it more difficult. Now, what we are seeing is some increased enrollment in Timnath, Wellington, and Bamford. And so disproportionately so. So there's going to have to be some redrawing of boundaries of, again, where maybe Bamford, which is south of Harmony Road, but east of I-25, rather than feeding into Timnath Middle High, feeds into Preston and Fossil Ridge to continue to kind of boost those numbers at those schools and offload some of that strain that Timnath has. Currently, Wellington seems to be doing just fine. And then other options are to build modular facilities for places like Bamford and Bethke, but those come at a cost of about $450,000 a pop. One of the conversations was equity, and it looked like, based off of some of the schools that they were considering closing and consolidating, equity and marginalized populations of Fort Collins weren't taken into consideration. And in fact, it sounds like that steering committee said, yeah, it wasn't a huge guiding principle, but it did ultimately come up in plenty of conversations, and why places like Linton Elementary, Irish, Olander, Johnson, were there was conversations of like, this just doesn't look right based off of the student demographic and why we're closing these. Like, whether we meant to or not, it doesn't really pass the eye test. And so we're going to pull back, was one of the reasons, one of the many reasons they pulled back. And so if they were to consider this kind of steering committee again, I bet you that comes into play a little bit more than it did last time. And then finally, they were talking about how can we consider more pre-K programs. Pre-K is expensive. Depending on if you go half day or full day, it could very well be anywhere between $600 to $1,000 a month or more, depending on what school and whether it's funded. Now, there are some free pre-K dollars out there. I think it's 15 or 20 hours a week if you are in the Universal Pre-K program, UPK, within Colorado. So there are some dollars out there, but sometimes it's not enough. I talked to my wife quite a bit about it. I was like, gosh, these hours are horrendous with one of my kids in school last year for preschool. And it was $12.50 drop off and a $3.25 pickup. And I'm like, so not only is it like middle of the day drop off, it's not even end of the day pickup. And I was like, thank God we have some flexibility in our schedules, because how the heck does a dual working household make it work? And so I do think that is something that needs to be addressed and looked at and understood, that, hey, Fort Collins, Northern Colorado, the United States in general seems to be completely necessary to have a dual working household for the majority of households. So having these conversations of support for kids 0 to 5 definitely needs to be something that is taken into consideration. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of an article that came out in the this week versus a conversation that was being had at City Council work session, which was, will mountain lion hunting be banned and bobcat trapping and hunting be banned in Colorado? And it is a citizen-led initiative, and they need to have 124,000 valid signatures. They're actually already it has 130 to 135,000, but they basically do a math equation saying only 75% of these signatures are valid. So they need to get about another 40 to 50,000 by July 5th. And if that get enough signatures, it will go on to the November 5th ballot for people to either vote that no, we don't think there should be any mountain lion hunting or bobcat hunting and trapping, or yes, we should. And apparently there are increased, even with current hunting availability of bobcats and mountain lions, their populations are growing. So it's an interesting time period, but I think, with the Wolverine thing and I've made my point kind of clear. Like, I feel like there are bigger fish to fry. And those, but hey, it's a citizen-led initiative. It's not necessarily using state dollars at this time. And the Hughes Stadium was a citizen-led initiative saying that we should buy this land from the state. And we'll talk about that here shortly. We don't want it to be a big housing development. This is not what we want on the west side, 160 acres. We want it to be open land and natural areas. So there was a citizen-led initiative to buy that land from the state. Not nearly as much signatures are needed in Fort Collins as the state of Colorado. But we'll talk about that here shortly. Wildfire burning near Twin Lakes. Now, actually, I want to show a picture, so I'm going to show it here. And as of Sunday evening, they had about 85% of it, 86% of it contained. But this is near Leadville, so I'll put this onto the screen. And, we do have a fair amount of folks that are, that talk to me about, hey, how's the wildfires and all and everything like that. And I'm like, well, they're here. It's part of life, unfortunately. But I think that we're doing such a great job as a state. And what I want you to read this kind of quote. And they're saying that there was 600 acres burnt, but there was a scheduled burn in 2018, and between that And the time of year, it's only at 600, where it could have been at 60,000 acres if this fire had started in late July or August. And he said, it's kind of interesting when he says, again, it doesn't feel like it, but it's moderate fire conditions and things are really, he says it's something cool. Yeah. The fire has been burning since Tuesday and we're still under 600 acres. And that's pretty cool. So that's the perspective that we're going off of right now of, hey, this was a fire that is absolutely under control at this time, about 86% contained as of Sunday. But it also brings to light my dad, he hikes all over Colorado about 3 to 4 times a week, and was talking to him the other day on the phone, and he was saying, I fell, which, he's in his mid 60s and you don't want to be falling, especially up in the mountains by yourself, because he goes hiking by himself. But the reason why he said that he fell was because he was not paying attention, because he was looking at his watch, because he was hiking and he saw a couple of young people, a young couple, hiking back. And then he went another 5 or so minutes down, and there was still very much a burning fire. It wasn't like full flames, but it was very much red hot coals and not fully extinguished. So he turned on his heels, basically ran to get him, and just laid into him. And the excuse for why it wasn't put out was horrendous. Well, we didn't have any more water to pour on it. And it's like, dude, dirt, sand, whatever, snuff it out. You can't leave a freaking burning coal. And that's the kind of stuff that is uncontrollable, that whether we have all of the right precautions in place and even all of the rain, rain can definitely help. But if we have an overly dry year and some relatively young, generally, maybe not as well informed or experienced people go up and hike and camp in, let's say, Red Feather or, anywhere in that area, or up the PTER Canyon. And they go hiking and they start a fire, and then they leave it without putting it out all the way. And a gust of wind comes and starts a fire. It's terrifying. And so he rushed, talked to him. He ended up going, I think it was either him or them, I'm not sure who, put it all the way out, but he wasn't paying attention. He was watching his watch so that he knew where he was needing to go, and fell. But, again, a big reason why this show is put on a weekly basis is so that if you have a friend that's going up hiking or camping, or if somebody is, just let them know, like, hey, make sure to put out your fires, be careful, be safe, keep all of us safe. Because, there's been years and times where there have been fires in Colorado that blot out the sky, make it orange. And it's scary, it's terrifying. But with controlled burns, wetter seasons, timing, things of that nature, we've been really fortunate, knock on wood, with no huge or really bad fires really over the last 4 years or so. So let's keep that up. If you're watching this, whether that's live or on rerun, just spread the word, be safe, make sure that you're putting your fires fully out when you are done at your campsites. All right, now jumping into our city council work session. It was a 3-hour work session. They talked about our housing and urban development report. So there's some dollars coming up. We'll talk about that. Our land use code specifically for commercial and mixed use, our building performance standards, and then what to do with Hughes land. So, it was thick with some great information. And so housing and urban development, there are some federal dollars out there and grants that we have to put together plans of how we're going to use funds, but a fair amount of dollars. So $8.5 million over 5 years. And so, a fair amount of money that needs to be used to and we'll talk about how those uses are done, but City of Fort Collins are putting together their plans for our next 5-year plan. What was interesting is public service activities cannot exceed 15%. So this is kind of like rental help if someone's going through an eviction, and there's only 15% of those dollars can be used for that. So that's great. But otherwise, you can use it for homeownership rehabilitation, homeownership purchases, rental housing activities, acquisition, rehabilitation, offsite infrastructure, and then public facilities. So develop facilities for persons with special needs and or homeless shelters. Here are some of the projects that were taken care of with our previous 5 years of funding. Was 328 new affordable rental housing units, 10 new affordable ownership units, 286 affordable housing units preserved. So rehabs, things of that nature. Because one of the things that people don't talk about as much is kind of, there are lifespans of houses, and sometimes they get demolished and rebuilt. And so that also impacts supply. But if you can maintain, upkeep, and keep your houses, like we were just talking about with the PTER School District facility for $50 million, their current facility is almost past the point of saving. And because of other pressures, capacity and things of that nature, there's just not enough dollars that make sense to renovate this property at this time versus maybe finding something new that accommodates more than just the current needs, but also future needs as well. So 267 or 286 affordable housing units preserved, updated, renovated. 267 people provided homeless prevention support. So people that are going through potentially eviction and don't have anywhere to go from there, receiving help. 4,827 people received provided overnight shelter. 990 people provided day shelter and other services. And 821 people provided supportive services to improve living conditions, adult daycare, behavioral health services, and support. So that's how our dollars were spent on our last go round. So you can see, Fort Collins definitely has it in their forefront. They're very active about getting these funds and these monies and grants to hopefully help with our affordable housing issue, which again relates to the PTER School District of, 60% of area median income and different things. There's lots of different kind of analysis of what is affordable, what is poverty, and things of that nature. But it is a conversation that we are absolutely having to go with. The second thing that they talked about was our land use code for commercial. Now, again, we started this live broadcast after 2020 when the land development code went through, and it just seemed like nobody knew what was going on. And so hopefully this channel helps give you that information. But now part 2 is the commercial side of it, which is equally as exciting as the residential side, but maybe not as impactful emotionally or directly to individual homeowners as the residential side goes. So there's three housing bills that could affect how we go forward with this, but it's going to be about an 18-month, probably right around 18 months before this land use code goes through city council for adoption on first and second reading. So we got a long ways to go. They're going to do a ton of public outreach. This is just kind of preempting what they're going to be looking at doing. So there was 3 housing bills. Housing Bill 1313, Housing and Transit-Oriented Communities. This bill will require the establishment of a housing opportunity goal, potential rezonings, establishment of an anti-displacement strategy, and reporting on an ongoing basis. Again, that's kind of that transit-oriented kind of overlay. Accessory dwelling units. We've talked about this before. House Bill 1152, essentially requiring that all housing homeowners are allowed to build on ADUs. So this says this bill will require updating our land use code to permit accessory dwelling units wherever we allow single family detached homes. Code language from previous iterations of the land use code has already been drafted. We will need to confirm that previously written code language would comply with this bill because there are state funds available and grants and programs and things of that nature if we comply. Minimum parking requirements. This will require updates to the land use code to remove minimum parking requirements for multifamily and certain mixed-use projects close to transit. So again, they're trying to offload. There's a lot of different plans and projects, carbon neutrality, density, because when you build a parking space, what does that do? It removes space that could have been used for a house, which makes the property less valuable if you have to put parking in. So there are some state requirements, state bills, housing bills that are going to dictate some of our land use code for the commercial. But then they also, and I'll share my screen on this because I think it's probably worthwhile. There are so many governing documents, and here are some of the documents: city plan, transit master plan, climate future, housing strategic, economic health strategic plan, 15-minute city analysis. So city plan, promote infill and development. There's about 25% of Fort Collins has left to be developed for infill and those opportunities. Maintain and enhance our unique character and sense of place as the community grows. Fort Collins is extremely special. People see it when they come in here. We just had clients come in from Arizona, and they immediately shifted from if moving to Fort Collins to when moving to Fort Collins. And how do we preserve that character, including our commercial? Because I would say, and I'm not hating on Loveland, but one of the things that Fort Collins has done such a great job of is its overall master plan for the city. There are distinct commercial corridors along 287, College Avenue, Harmony, an industrial area over at the air park, kind of our I-25 corridor, and then residential and things of that nature. So it's very easily, and it's a grid system, so it's easily navigable, and it makes sense and not necessarily kind of cobbled together. You don't have like a office space next to a warehouse, next to a house, next to a restaurant, But some of the goals that we do have is these 15-minute communities. So we'll have to see where that looks like. Future transit network. I'm going to be doing and I'm concerned about it because my schedule always packs, and I just got to, just figure it out. But I'm going to do a week of public transportation only. So that will include Uber. This will basically be kind of like a stress test to a very minimal degree of Fort Collins goals of these 15-minute communities, less vehicles on the road, use public transportation. And I will say our house, while we are very much in a great area for using all of our paved trail systems, I can get onto the Fossil Creek Trail very easily, Mason Trail very easily, Power Trail very easily, which then connects to the PTER Trail, Spring Creek Trail. So, I am very much connected on that. But public transportation in my side of town's not awesome. So I'll be curious to see how that goes. But I will allow myself biking, Ubers, and buses. Excuse me. Again, sorry. Our climate future, again, 80% reduction by 2030, net neutrality by 2050. Housing strategic plan, create additional development incentives for affordable housing. Economic health, help small business have access to tools and resources that they need to succeed. And then the 15-minute city, shift to active modes trips. So more bikes, electric scooters, buses, Ubers, less trucks on the road, aka mine. So that's kind of the commercial land use code. They're going to start doing some public outreach, get involved, provide feedback. This, in my opinion, I am not super knowledgeable on a national political scale, geopolitics. I am not very informed. I do pay attention minimally. I have mentors, resources that help inform me on that side of things. But this has a direct impact on our day-to-day living that we will see pretty immediately from the decisions or indecisions that we are involved or not involved in. So hopefully you're watching this, and if you are, get involved. But they're going to be sending out email newsletters, website updates, in-person and virtual events, focus groups, website videos, open houses, boards and commissions work styles, website videos, staff office hours. And one of the biggest gripes about the residential land use code update was, where was the information? It was not, no one was telling me anything. It was there. It just was hard to see. So I think the city has a little bit better of a job to do. Some of the resources, outreach, they spend a lot of money on it, that's for sure. Last time they did $90,000 postcards, which I honestly thought was the worst use of funds. But there are people who don't have email addresses or social media accounts and access to internet on a daily basis. So they still have to provide optionality, and you have to have it some equity across the board. And so I know that they have challenges because, you don't want to be non-inclusive if you choose, okay, groups under 35 years old, we're going to send a massive blast out for Instagram, an Instagram ad, and we're going to target those groups. Anybody over 60 years old, we're going to send out postcards and door hangers to. And all of that data is out there. But I do understand, I'm sure, the city attorneys are like, whoa. There are some major fair housing type issues that could become an issue that a 25-year-old who might not necessarily have the funds, means, or ability to get on Instagram or Facebook, but does have, a door because they're living at a rental or own a house or whatever and didn't get a hanger. So I'm sure they've got a lot of challenges, but hopefully avenues and mediums like this provide some information for you guys moving forward. The next one, building performance standards. Now, I ran and oversaw the Old Town buildings in the Old Town Square for nearly a decade. And as I was leaving, I will absolutely say I washed my hands of that. They were just starting the building performance standards and benchmarking at that time. So all we were required to do at that time, which was kind of like well, why are you doing this? And like, oh, we're just getting benchmarking data. Well, at least that was the narrative that I heard and we heard as building owners at that time. And it was like, I don't know about that, but we're asking for electricity use, water use, and gas use. And we had to basically, because our buildings were over a certain size, submit our data to the city of Fort Collins. And they've been compiling this data, and now they're going to be requiring building performance standards, or possibly requiring building performance standards. And based off of our Climate Futures plan, city council members were kind of mixed on this, because I'm going to show, again, my screen. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see this. So what this is showing on my screen is how many buildings of certain sizes there are, how many would need to act based off of the performance standards that we would require, and when they would have until. So for 5,000 and 10,000 square foot buildings. Now, quick caveat, multifamily is included, but really only if you're 3 stories or higher, because they believe 2 stories or below are actually like market rate affordable housing just by the nature of the buildings, whereas 3 stories are more not market rate. They're not affordable. They are market rate and do need to comply with some of these standards. So multifamily buildings are included in this. I don't know about these numbers, but 310 buildings, 200 of which would need to do some sort of adjustment, which is equating to $4.11 to $4.56 per square foot. So like, let's say you have a 10,000 square foot building. That's $4,100 or $41,000 to $45,000 that they're asking you to invest in your building to bring it up to their standards. I mean, let's put it this way. If you own a 10,000 square foot commercial building, you're probably doing all right. I mean, unless you've owned it just for, let's just say, let's say my dad, for instance, he owns a 12,000 square. Well, there's 2 buildings. One's 5,000 square feet. One's 7,000 square feet. So, but I don't think they're in Fort Collins proper. So I don't think this would apply to him, but he's owned it since the 80s, and potentially getting a notice in the mail saying, hey, you got to write a $40,000 check, so to speak. There's other options. This is just on average what it would cost per square foot. So don't get me wrong. It's not like you're going to get a bill and all that kind of stuff, but you would have to do some sort of updating that could equate to $4.11 per square foot that ultimately equates to about $40,000 to $45,000. And maybe he's not in a position to be able to do that type of renovation, or he has until 2035, but that's a lot of money to be saved. So there was this conversation, and especially on the multifamily side of things, they were like, we don't want to put more burdens on owners that are going to pass it on to the renters. So is this a good thing? And how do we make sure? And is there opt-outs if your building's too old, or if you don't have the financial ability? So there was a lot of great conversation, but regardless, Kelly Olson comes on and says, well, if we're not adopting this, we need to take out, our statement from our city saying that we have a climate crisis. Because if we aren't making these types of decisions that will have an impact on our carbon emissions emitted, then, we're not putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. And there's even city government buildings that would have to have some pretty decent and sizable financial contributions and considerations to come up to standards. So this is a pretty big deal. It's going through city council work sessions right now. It has not been adopted. It is not in place, but it looks like it's very much going to be sooner than later. So if you own a commercial building that's greater than 5,000 square feet, there might be some building performance updates, aka heating, windows, roof, insulation, that you might be somewhat forced to do. Now, it does talk about cost of things of that nature. That's great. But what I want to see, I wanted to show. I wanted to show, well, regardless, we'll keep moving. But you own a 5,000 to 10,000 square foot building, and you're going to, fines. They're talking about fines are going to be just a touch higher than it would cost to do your renovating. So like, let's say it costs $1 to do your renovation. You own 5,000 square foot building. It could be $5,500, so that you're incentivized to go make the updates. And they would say that there would be a cure period to where maybe they would forgive the citation and fine if you complied with their requirements. So it's a pretty big deal. I think it would be great for Fort Collins long term. One of my big conversations, I think, and considerations for things like this is, I absolutely think, we got to push some of these things through, not hope that they just happen on their own. But I also think there's some technology that could be coming down the pipeline, and more efficient, heat pumps versus forced air furnaces, types of roof, insulation, windows that could become more affordable with maybe 3D printing, that we could look back in 5 years and just say, if we waited 5 years, we could have saw these new state-of-the-art windows that instead of $1,000 a window, they're $250 a window. And rather than $50,000 to replace all the windows in somebody's house, it's $15,000, which is much more reasonable. And like solar forever was not a good return on investment, because it was like a 25-year payback or a 30-year payback. And that's just, that's more of a personal desire. But over the last decade, that payback has become less than 10 years a lot of times. And soon our battery power ability to store the power that's not needed on, bright sunny days, or, days that you don't use the AC as much. But instead of like an 8-hour battery, it's a 100-hour battery. So you get, for 3 days, use the power that you generated on the days that you didn't use it. So I think there are some things that I think we could look at, delay. Sure, we need a little bit of pushing to get us, going. But I feel like, man, some technology is happening, and there's enough business and desire that capital, business owners, entrepreneurs are coming, and capital is pouring into some of these researchers and companies. So we shall see where that goes. But that being said, our last part of City of Fort Collins, the city work session, was what to do with the Hughes land. So quick backstory, Hughes Stadium, built in the early 1960s, all the way up until 2016 was used. Subsequently has been demolished. There was a citizen-led initiative after the state of Colorado was considering building some affordable housing or housing options for CSU employees because there was a state-owned land. City of Fort Collins said, whoa, we want this to remain open. It's so amazing. It's wonderful. It's on the west side of town. And so there was a city-led initiative that said, we want to keep this as wildlife and open lands and public space. And so now, as of last year, City of Fort Collins has purchased that 164-acre piece of land for $12 million. And now we have to decide, what are we going to do with it? And there's going to be a ton of public outreach. They were talking about having a people's assembly, basically a for-pay position where they get a randomized group of people in Fort Collins, about 30 people, but it would be sent out to the entire community, and they would try to have a representative group come together and make a decision about what is going to happen on that land. And for comparison's sake, Spring Canyon Park is the biggest park at 123 acres. And then if you take into consideration City Park, Sheldon Lake, the pool, City Park 9, and Grandview Cemetery, that's about 170 acres. So this piece of land is transformational, especially on the west side of town, could be transformational with what we decide to do with it. It's right next to Spring Canyon Park, which is 123 acres, which is also a massive, wonderful, beautiful park. And but Kelly Olson goes, I mean, that's fine. We can have a people's assembly, but if they come to something that I don't agree with, I believe I was voted into this position for my judgment. And if I agree with that, I'll vote for it. Great. But if I don't, I will very strongly oppose it. So even if there's that people's assembly that gets put together, built, and they come to some conclusion of what they want to do with it, doesn't necessarily promise that's what would happen. Otherwise, the city council could potentially put together some ideas and then put it through to a vote on first and second reading. So there will be some public outreach of a desire of what to do with that. Some conversations are a raptor rescue and rehabilitation facility, open space, public space, BMX parks, parks. So there are going to be lots of options, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think it's going to be a very slow decision, because 164 acres on the west side of town is definitely transformational, and you don't want it to be a dud. That is for sure. All righty, some things to do moving forward. Every week on Monday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., there is basically paddleboarding. They call it Fun Day Monday. Paddleboarding for $20 an hour or $35 for 2 hours. And that is at Horsetooth South Bay. There is the second annual Take Me to the River. And all I could think about was, take me to the river, drop me in the water. Now, I am not a singer, so I apologize, but that is what it made me think of. And that is $150 per person at Bingham Hill Road. And there's going to be some fun things. It looks like food station, open bar, craft beer, live music, fundraising for critical projects. Now, this is focused around and for the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. So all considering what a great resource we have in the Poudre River. Summerfest 2024 looks like there's going to be a antique car show, and this is going to be along, where is it going to be? 313 North Meldrum. Vintage car show, grocery, live music. We were just driving through Brighton, which, gosh, I don't want to poo-poo on any area, but we were in Brighton, Colorado, and it was just not awesome. As far as whenever I drive in there, I'm like, gosh, they just need some work, some love. And I talked with some clients that are also doing carriage track, And I said, I've been running a YouTube channel for 5 years, but I'm very fortunate that I'm selling such an amazing place that is Fort Collins in Northern Colorado. It's an easy sell. I couldn't imagine running a YouTube channel trying to sell Brighton, Colorado. I mean, I'm sure there's some really cool parts and developments and maybe some fun things that are happening. But man, I mean, if I were driving into Brighton from I-25, it would not leave me super excited. But regardless, there was a car show there that I was like, oh man, that's super cool. I wonder when Fort Collins' next car show is. Well, it is June 22nd, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So go check it out, 313 North Meldrum. And then there is going to be Meals on 4th, 104 4th Street in Loveland, Colorado, 6 to 9 p.m. June 18th, so tomorrow. It can be food, beers, all that good stuff, but fun things to do in downtown Loveland. Loveland is great about getting their community involved, interaction, and engagement. So go check that out. Loveland, 4 p.m. tomorrow on 6 to 9 p.m. on 4th Street. So I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes, but no comments, no questions at this time. Again, we come live every Monday. I'm actually, we're going to get going. We got a listing coming live in Johnstown, which Johnstown seems to be a fan favorite within our team. With the Buc-ee's going in, the new high school being built, the price point, kind of all of the development that's happening, its location in regards to Fort Collins, Windsor, Denver, I-25. So we got a listing coming live in Johnstown. Excited to go shoot that video, and appreciate you guys watching as always. You guys have a great rest of your day. Take care.